Hello and welcome back to Self-Made. I'm your host, D. Brown, CEO. On the last episode of Self-Made, I was interviewing James Bryson, who is the nephew of Annie Malone, who considered to be the first black female millionaire. James, welcome back to part 2.
Thank you.
Of Self-Made. Now, James, on the previous episode, we were discussing the hidden story of Annie Turnbull Malone, the first black female millionaire, your aunt.
Great grand aunt.
Now, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, there were a couple of things. I had just looking over all the documents and photographs and letters and things that were left to my mother and kind of overwhelmed. So I had heard about this great movie, I thought, that LeBron James had produced, and it was called Self-Made.
What a coincidence.
Millionaire. What a
That's
coincidence,
right.
Netflix. And I said, well, let me look at this, because I know it's going to be interesting. Well, after I looked at that and started, I really got emotional because of the things that I saw in there that were just so untrue. It was like a character assassination on my great-grand aunt. Her name was Annie Monroe in there. She was portrayed as light-skinned, lighter than me, mulatto, who was always kind of very jealous and bitter over Madam C.J. Walker, who was the star of the movie, and just portrayed her in a negative light. So after I looked at that, I said, you know, this ain't true. This is not true whatsoever. And so I started gathering things, and I just her spirit just entered me, and I started writing. And then I was reading things about the reaction to the movie, and people really was a good thing because it stimulated a resurrection in the memory and legacy and curiosity of who Annie Malone was. So that's when I started writing the book.
Yeah. So just for our viewers who may not be familiar with Annie Malone and her story, tell us briefly who is Annie Malone and talk about some of the significant things that she accomplished.
Annie Malone was started the first cosmetology college as it relates to African American hair care. She was the runner to Amway, her marketing skills and strategies, Tupperware. She was a marketing genius. She lived here in Peoria for a while with my grandparents. She was actually raised with my grandfather and my uncles. She was originally from Metropolis, Illinois, and she was one of 10 children. And her parents died, and she moved here with her sister, Ada Turnbull, who actually married my great-grandfather, William Turnbull. And so while Annie was here, that's who they lived with, and built a house. Annie built a house for her sister, Ada, and my grandfather and uncles were raised there. So that's one of the first things. She also attended Peoria High in Peoria, Illinois. She was sickly, so she wasn't able to really complete school.
Yeah.
So my great aunt, Sarah Moody, who really kind of took Annie under her wing and helped Annie develop herbs and things. Mother Moody was an herbist. And so in order to help Annie heal from whatever ailment was going on with her, they also developed this hair care product that was used, and that was the formula that was used for Poro College.
Okay.
So Annie moved from Peoria when she was Annie came here when she was about 10 years old.
So what time frame, just to kind of help set the stage, what time frame are we talking about?
We're talking about Annie Malone. Now there's a discrepancy. Annie Malone, some say 1869, but our record show was 1877.
Okay.
So Annie came here about 1887. She attended Central High at about the 1890s. So we're talking about 1890s or so.
Right.
Annie moved from Peoria in 1900. So that's when the first Poirot came. She moved to Lovejoy, Illinois, and started one with a little shack. Started there. She moved with her sister. So we're talking about 1900.
Yeah.
1902. She developed the first Poirot, which was just a bigger house. And then 1916, 1917 was construction of the huge 5-story Poirot College, which had restaurants in there. It had clothing in there. It had a garden top roof in there. It was a mecca of the South, built by a black woman in the time. First of all, being a woman.
Right.
But being in the South, Missouri, time of Jim Crow, extreme racism.
Right.
She also fought at that time it was called the Spanish flu. So
Yeah.
we're going through COVID. She went through the Spanish flu and those
Right.
kind of things. So tremendous obstacles she was able to overcome and really prosper. More importantly, though, Annie Malone really had a deep commitment to personal and community empowerment. So if you worked for Poirot, you were able to make 10 times as much with your own business through hair care products as you would in the general public, because at that time, most African Americans were just domestic servants. They really had no opportunities in things. So.
Right. I mean, that's amazing for that era. Poirot College, how big did she grow that organization?
Well, Poirot College took a block. I think it was 5 stories. It was very similar to a civic center. So it was a huge undertaking. She stayed in St. Louis. She got married. I call him Pimp Daddy, Aaron Malone. He was he was a dynamic kind of guy as well. She made him the director of the college, and they were married for 13 years. Aaron was so ambitious, he decided that he wanted to take over the college. And that ended up in a tremendous loss for Annie Malone. She had to pay him half, which was $250,000 is what he got. And she really never recovered from that. That divorce took place in 1927, and as a result, she had to sell off a lot of things.
Yeah.
She also had haters. She had African Americans who were suing her. One thing I want to mention is that Madam C.J. Walker borrowed the business model. Annie Malone was one of the first individuals to develop a copyright in 1906. So she did a lot of things, involved with churches. She was an activist. She was a Pan-African. She would send Poirot employees to Africa, Monrovia, I believe, and that's still going on. Not only was she known in St. Louis, but she had a major college in every major city in America, as well as the Caribbean, South America, and Africa. So she was a real deal. She was a real business icon, self-made, like yourself.
Right. So how? Well, probably more so than myself, because I mean, when you consider the time, that this occurred.
Yes.
I mean, it's unprecedented. So how do you think she was able to navigate the racial and the not just being African American, but also being a woman? How was she able to navigate that during that? I mean, do you have any research that talked about how she was able to pull that off?
Well, you don't get those kind of things in research, but I can tell you, well, kind of. But Peoria was a tremendous. It was a genesis for Annie Malone. I mean, the Moody's were very religious. they planted a lot of the seeds and vision for Aunt Annie to go. They gave her confidence in her skills, in her abilities. They supported her. So it was just like a seed that was planted here in Peoria, and once the soil gets so fertile, you move on. So it was moved on to the St. Louis area. But Annie Malone, her middle name Minerva. This is one thing that I asked myself. My family's from slavery. They were escaped slaves. The Moody's, the Turnbulls, the escaped slaves. But Annie Malone, one day my daughter, she said, "Dad, you know what Minerva means?" I said, "No, it's European name. I don't know." Well, she made me look it up. Well, Minerva is from the Greek goddess who believed in healing, Athena. She was named after Athena.
Yep.
My question is, how do slaves have that kind of knowledge and have the wisdom to name a child after that who becomes all those things?
Right.
So that's a mystery that I have. Annie Malone participated in. She spearheaded a lot of the black consciousness, the Harlem Renaissance, the Negro movement. Very, very progressive. Her thought processes were bedded in Egyptian, and she was involved with secret societies that dealt with a lot of spiritual components and things. But more importantly, too, she was a devout Christian. And if it hadn't been for her faith and her belief in God, she wouldn't have been able to navigate any of those things, as well as being able to understand her purpose in life. Annie Malone knew her purpose. She knew that she was destined to greatness. She had the vision. She had the plan. Those kind of individuals, they're very, very rare to be able to navigate themselves, even in these days and times, but particularly in there. So she was a child of destiny. She was a prodigy child that was sent to replicate that in heaven as on earth. So that's how she was able to get through it.
So how did you learn about her story? Because I think you mentioned on the previous episode that at one point you weren't aware of all she had done and accomplished.
Well, after my grandfather, Roland, and my grandmother, Frances, Annie Malone, once she moved from St. Louis, and she started her new poro at the age of 60. She moved to Chicago, where up north, where there was more progression, more bigger African-American population, more income. And she kind of tried to run poro before she bought a poro block. There were 3 buildings. She started all over 60 years old, so that right there is quite an accomplishment. But Annie Malone had a trust issue because of the things that were happening to her, so she attempted to manage her own money. She was betrayed by accountants. You have racism, but then you have your own people,
right?
Which is a whole different dimension of betrayal. So she tried to manage her own accounting, and she was not an accountant. And she found herself in trouble with the feds. But because she had sent my uncles and some of her nieces to college, they kind of took over the business. Aunt Annie, and I have a letter there, she was asking her nephews, one of my uncles was an accountant, to come and help her because she was starting to experience what we call dementia, what we call it now.
Yeah.
And so she started losing her wits about business and things, and so she fell way behind in taxes. The feds came in, tried to take over the business. They did. She had to pay money to get that done. That was in the mid 42, 47, the feds came in. That was the time that my uncles came in, resurrected poro. They ran poro from about 1947 to 1992. So they were able to get it back on their feet. But there was other competition, Johnson & Johnson, you had the Curl,
Right.
and then you had white organizations who were also selling products. So a lot of competition came in. So Poro kind of faded. So my grandparents came in the 50s and became the executive director. So that's how I was able to acquire so many documents. My grandmother was a meticulous person who labeled everything. I mean, she even has rows of dimes and nickels. But all the pictures and documents that I've had, she wrote who they were. I got records, taxes. I got brochures from 1947 to 1974. I got pictures. I mean, I was blessed to have all these things. But it was very overwhelming because there was just so much. But these things come from the college. So these were the possessions and things that my grandparents were able to accumulate as they ran Poro College.
Yeah. So talk to me about the Annie Malone Center for Development that you have founded. Give me the details about, number one, what inspired you to do it and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, what inspired me to do it is as I started looking at these documents and things, I was saying, then I was contacted by people once I wrote my book. After I wrote the book was a tremendous educational tool and things. I started, and then talking to people around here, I started saying, you know, I need to find something that's going to resurrect her memory, educate people to the documents and the story. So that's when I decided to find the Annie Malone Center for Development. And the whole center is about teaching individuals and showing and exhibiting and resurrecting the legacy and the memory of Annie Malone. So I go into the schools. I have Annie Malone Principles of Leadership. I have Student Leadership. We have the exhibit down at the museum, which is kind of new in terms of African American.
Yeah.
We did the Annie Malone documentary, My Journey.
Yeah.
Which was a blessing. My grandmother lived in the house that Annie Malone bought for her sister and my grandparents. That's where my grandmother still lived when she passed. Okay. But all those things, the Annie Malone Center for Development was designed to share and to educate not just youth, but also adults and anyone who wants to learn about Annie Malone. You know, like yourself, she was self-made. So that's the idea of the Annie Malone Center for Development is keeping her memory alive, expanding it. I was contacted by BH365, which is a fairly new Black History curriculum. And Annie Malone is included in that. It's such an honor, such a blessing. So it's those kind of initiatives and things. I've had several movie offers regarding her. Still waiting for one to pan out. So that's the whole idea behind that.
How have just her legacy and the things that she was able to accomplish in such a difficult time, how has that inspired you in terms of the work that you're doing here in the community?
Well, it's inspired me to be able to first of all understand what her principles of success is. And those principles of success, which I also model, is she had a vision. And without a vision, people perish.
Right.
And as I go around and talking to people, most people are struggling with a vision. They don't have a vision. They want to do something, they just don't know what it is.
Right.
But once you have a vision, then you can see where you're going. But with a vision, you need a plan. Annie Malone had a plan. So you have a vision, you have a plan. more now than ever, I think our country really, really needs to have a commitment to personal growth as well as community responsibility.
Right.
Annie Malone was a really strong proponent of helping people maximize their potential. She would send people to school. She taught people how to walk, how to talk, soft skills. Would buy them houses. She just really was a people lover. So she really, really believed in personal development, but also community development. I mean, she
Right.
gave away millions of dollars. She has an orphanage in St. Louis. She was involved with a lot of churches. She had her own sorority, Poro sorority. So she really, really believed in community empowerment as well. So that's the third one. But the other thing that people really need, that we lack so much, particularly self-handicapped behavior, is the ability to bounce back. We call that resilience.
Right.
Teaching people to be resilient. Because if you're not resilient, you're not going to accomplish anything.
Right.
You have to be able to bounce back. So resiliency is really a big issue. But also, the last one, which I think they all go hand in hand, is having a spiritual foundation. Because without a spiritual foundation, having something higher than yourself, or a philosophy that you believe in, having faith, understanding spiritual principles, law of attraction, those kind of things, like you,
Yeah.
law of attraction. You sent to me, I'm sent to you. Once you combine all those kind of things, then anyone can be the next Annie Malone and self-made, the next political icon, the next doctor,
Right.
all those kind of building wealth. So those are the principles that servant leadership, those are the kind of things that I teach and
Yeah.
really pursue with other individuals.
And you mentioned servant leadership previously. Can you kind of expand on your philosophy as it relates to servant leadership and why it's such a valuable tool to have?
Well, yeah, and I'm going to tell you a little something about ancestral guidance. So, as I shared with you, I've been involved with people, education, workforce development, books, African American male. I thought that all that was me. Ms. Agbara doing this. I didn't realize I was being guided.
Right.
I didn't realize that Annie Malone was guiding me. I thought that this was me. I didn't know about Annie Malone. And so ancestral guidance, her guiding me, showing me, has really impacted and inspired me, because now I'm kind of the next Annie Malone who can teach anyone to maximize, self-actualize on who they really want to become.
Right. That makes sense. And so what do you want, I guess, for you? What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I would really like to see the Annie Malone Center for Development. Our goal is to, there's two things. One is creating her presence in a DAO. The other is creating a presence in the metaverse. The other is making sure that each student in the school district has an Annie Malone book and understand who she is, but also maybe having a physical building, Annie Malone Center for Development, where her artifacts and pictures and things can be stored, having beauty and culture center there, barbers, cosmetologists, nail folks there, bringing expositions, bringing the hair care business back to Peoria and making it an economic development component, and making Annie Malone the center and magnet for tourism to come to Peoria. So I envision, I call it the Annie Malone Triangle, from Peoria to St. Louis, back to Peoria.
Okay.
So having people aware of that, participate in that, and that's for all people. Have it develop economic development for the city, and an Annie Malone Day parade as well. So those are some of the things that I'd really like to see.
Well, it looked like you're well on your way to accomplishing all of that.
Thank you.
And I think that the story of Annie Malone is an inspiring story, and I think it's one that all people, and especially our people, need to learn about, because if she could do this in the 18 and early 1900s, then there should be nothing that could stop individuals from pursuing and achieving their dreams in today's environment in America. And although that environment is not perfect, we got a lot of work to do. It's not what it was during the time frame in which she had to go through her struggle to get to where she was.
Yes, sir.
And so I thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
And it's been a great episode. And to my viewers, thank you for watching this episode of Self-Made with D. Brown CEO. And remember, without you, there's no me.